Cillian Murphy's return in 28 years later couldn't be more exciting, even if he does not star in it. After much speculation, 28 years later is in development with original writer Alex Garland and director Danny Boyle returning. The idea is that 28 years later will be the first installment in a new trilogy. Whether Murphy would return for the legacy sequel was perhaps the biggest question surrounding the project, and while not much is known about 28 years later story, the recent updates are promising. 28 years later sees Murphy as Jim, a young man desperately fighting for his survival in London after a deadly virus turns virtually all of its citizens into zombies. Lauded for its depiction of zombies and themes of society turning on itself in a vain effort to outlast the zombie outbreak, Jim remains one of Cillian Murphy's best movie roles. This is why Murphy's return to 28 years later has been so anticipated, and while Jim's role in 28 years later hasn't been confirmed yet, the star will be involved in the project. Cillian Murphy will executive produce 28 years later. Murphy's role as executive producer doesn't rule out a starring or feature role. Cillian Murphy as Jim in 28 Days Later. Cillian Murphy will return to 28 years later as an executive producer, which is great news considering he is perhaps the second most involved individual in the survival horror franchise besides Boyle and Garland. While more details are sure to unfold regarding Murphy's status as an executive producer, it remains great news as it already demonstrates a certain level of care is being taken into account regarding the upcoming sequel. Whereas other legacy films switch the creative force behind the projects entirely, resulting in lackluster sequels and reboots, Murphy's role as an executive producer is great news. Although Murphy is primarily known for his work as an actor, he has already proven himself to be a competent and even effective producer, as seen with the success he's had with the critically acclaimed Peaky Blinders. Murphy's role as an executive producer on 28 Days Later could prove to be a great move since his prior experience with the franchise suggests a more vested interest in it than that of almost anyone else. Another reason why the news bodes well for Murphy is because it suggests his character, Jim, might make a return to the franchise. Should Cillian Murphy's Jim return in 28 years later? Jim could return since he survived the events of 28 Days Later. Murphy's return to 28 years later as Jim is very possible since the original film's ending suggests that Jim survives the events of the traumatic ordeal along with Selena and Hannah. The bravery and improvisational skills that Jim displays throughout the events of 28 Days Later would make for compelling and engaging material for the upcoming sequel, and given Murphy's more recent work in similar projects like A Quiet Place Part 2 and, to a lesser extent, Dunkirk, it would be interesting to see him reprise his role of a man trying to survive a challenging event. However, it probably works best for the upcoming franchise if the events focus on new characters instead of bringing back legacy characters. While Jim, Selena, and Hannah are great characters in their own right, they were perfect for the particular story they were created for. 28 years later should focus on new characters, so the action and drama feel fresh, and so they stand a better chance at carrying their own franchise. Bringing Jim back would be a nice nod to the 2002 film, but it would also take the spotlight away from the new cast of survivors. Why Cillian Murphy's 28 years later involvement is so exciting. Murphy's beloved status and recent string of successes make a possible return exciting. Cillian Murphy as Jim at the end of 28 Days Later. Murphy's involvement with 28 years later is exciting because he's evolved considerably as an actor since the original film hit theaters back in 2002. As seen with his incredible run with acclaimed director Christopher Nolan as well as in the well-received crime drama, Peaky Blinders, Murphy has demonstrated an incredible amount of range as an actor, but more importantly, he's displayed an excellent level of acumen when accepting roles. On account of Murphy's work ethic and intuition, it isn't a stretch to assume the actor will play a crucial role in ensuring 28 years later success. Furthermore, the recent Oscar buzz surrounding Murphy's work in the globally acclaimed Oppenheimer indicates that the star is finally receiving the recognition he's always deserved. With his string of supporting and starring roles over the last 2 years alone, Murphy has demonstrated an incredible sense of love and respect for his craft. As such, Murphy's executive producer role in 28 years later will undoubtedly ensure the right amount of care is applied to the sequel. Additionally, audiences familiar with the original film will likely feel more compelled to see 28 years later with his direct involvement factored in.